Yeah, 27, 28 years ago, I don't think I knew how to spell the word cyber. Nonetheless, even think about getting into it. But I'll tell you a little bit about my journey about into the Secret Service. Through college, through grade school, elementary school, I always knew I wanted to be involved in law enforcement. My best friend dad was a cop, and it was somebody I looked up to in law enforcement investigations. And you don't know as a kid what that journey is going to bring you to.
Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome. You know what time it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. E is in the house. And I'm so excited, continuing our series where not only hearing from me with an episode, but we're bringing on top-notch guests from the industry to share their experience and their knowledge. And super excited to have Mike with us today. 25 years with the Secret Service. Now he's in the commercial sector helping to secure and protect infrastructure. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Dr. Cole, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here and be with your audience today.
My pleasure. I always, someone with a fascinating background as yours, I always love asking that question. If we go back, whether it's probably like 27, 28, 30 years, how did you actually get in this sort of cybersecurity? And I know you worked at the Secret Service, and did you start in cyber or switch? Can you sort of talk about sort of how you got in? I know one of the things our viewers always like is that first time. Like everyone's like, if you have experience heading up a division at the Secret Service or heading up a department, it's easy. But how do you get that initial experience? And how did you initially get interested, engaged in cyber?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, 27, 28 years ago, I don't think I knew how to spell the word cyber. Nonetheless, even think about getting into it. But I'll tell you a little bit about my journey about into the Secret Service. Through college, through grade school, elementary school, I always knew I wanted to be involved in law enforcement. My best friend dad was a cop, and it was somebody I looked up to in law enforcement investigations. And you don't know as a kid what that journey is going to bring you to. And then as I went to college and I started doing more research, I understood that the federal agencies was where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to the Marine Corps. I thought about doing that journey, and then I just was, drawn to like the FBI, the Secret Service, U.S. Marshals at the time when I was going through college, and just researching all of them. I just fell in love with the Secret Service's mission, the dual mission of both investigations, which a lot of people don't understand, that the Secret Service was actually founded on conducting criminal investigations, protecting our critical institutions with our financial systems. That was their original mission before protecting the president. And then, during my time in college, I had to do an internship. Came time to do an internship, and I was lucky enough to apply to the Secret Service, do an internship, and they accepted. And I got to spend about 8 months doing an internship with them, and I learned both missions, and I learned the integrity of their investigations, and I loved it. I fell in love with the mission, fell in love with their goals, and it was a career path that I knew that I wanted to get on.
What was this like? The late 1990s? Like what's the years, just to put it in perspective?
Believe it or not, it was early 2000, 1999, 2000. I was probably an intern about 98, 99, and I was lucky enough that the service was doing a mass hiring. The Vietnam era was retiring. It was about that 25-year mark. The Vietnam era was leaving government, and they were doing a mass hiring, and they wanted to hire young individuals right out of college who they can train and mold into good agents. And I was lucky to be part of that young group, be hired right out of college, which is unheard of at that time, to go into the Secret Service at 22 years old. I was hired and brought in, and went to New York City for my first assignment, and started learning how to do criminal investigations. And back then, cyber was just starting. It wasn't even really, on the cusp. We were still doing credit card investigations. We're still doing counterfeit money investigations, believe it or not. And,
paper checks, right? Old schools.
Old school investigations. And it wasn't until probably midway through my 6.5 years in New York City before I went to the president's detail in DC that cyber started taking a more initiative, where electronic payments started becoming a little bit more popular, and credit card transactions, the banking system was going more digital, is when you started taking that cusp into, hey, this is something that's on the cusp of brewing, and we need to start looking into how we can combat it. And it's it progressed all the way through my career, and culminated now at the end of my career to be the head of the assistant director over investigations, which oversaw all our cyber investigations across the world. It was a culmination of 25 years of the progression of not just my career, but cyber, where cyber has come from being a new age thing to every part of everything we do, whether it's information technology or operational technology. It's in part of everything that we do today.
And once again, I'll keep this sort of generic because we don't want to get into any specific investigations, but I'm big on sort of patterns of sort of those common mistakes and issues that people make. What would you sort of say across all the investigations you've worked on, sort of some of the common exposure points that companies miss that allow them to get compromised or broken into?
Human error. I think when we look at from the beginning of time until now, everybody talks about training when it comes to your work staff, when it comes to investigations. And that's what we saw on the investigative side when we were investigating cases. That's exactly what we saw. That what's the cliche? You're only as strong as your weakest link. It's exactly what we saw was, you can have all the perimeter defenses possible when it comes to cybersecurity. You can have all the tools, all the gadgets, but it still comes down to human error and training. And we saw that a lot. I'll give you a prime example of how training worked and where training came into place. I'll be broad on this, but we had an investigation when I was a working agent, and before I became a what I call an executive and didn't do work anymore. I used to tease that I wasn't a real agent anymore. But
isn't it once an agent, always an agent? Isn't it sort of like the Marine Corps motto?
I hope so. I like to think that.
Yeah.
But we had a large scale investigation where it came down to I'm sorry, no, I was giving a presentation and I was approached at the end about and the topic of the presentation was training. It was about business email compromise fraud, where companies were getting hit with email fraud, where they're wiring money to they thought was a legitimate partner or company and end up not being because their systems were compromised. But I had an individual come up to me and say, my company recently. We were attacked. Our business administrator or office manager was contacted and said, wire such and such money to this account, the typical rush and hurry up and try to make the transaction. But they had a two-factor authentication in place where they had to have two employees agree, and it happened to be the two employees were husband and wife they were the owners of the company, both had to agree on the transaction separately. And ironically, the office manager called the one CEO and said, "Hey, your husband," that's what it was a deep fake. The husband authorized this transaction, and we need your approval to authorize the transaction. She said, "Well, that's not possible because my husband's sitting next to me and we're on vacation and he didn't get any phone calls." So it was the training. That's the whole point, is that the employee knew exactly what to do. They had a system and protocol in place and it worked. So go back to your original question. I think when it comes down to the nitty gritty, still, whether it's in my new role, what I'm seeing in private sector or what we saw as criminal investigations, it still comes down to the human factor.
Yeah. And I love what you say. It's some of the core principles. One of the things we always teach is least privilege and then separation of duties, where you give somebody the least amount of access, but then you split it among two parties. And I think that's a critical part of the user awareness, because you can go in and train somebody all day long, but with all the advanced technologies, AI and others, they can still be tricked. But like you said, if you have two people that have to agree, and they coordinate, or like husband and wife, they're together going, "We're drinking pina coladas." Like there's no way they got the call yet. So I think it's that old school separation of duties and just putting those principles in place. Now, one of the things I know a lot of people run across, and I'd love your thoughts on it, is always sort of balancing that security with the inconvenience. Because we always sort of talk about cybersecurity as a business enabler, but then you hear a lot of the execs where you go in and say, well, anytime you approve any financial transaction, you need separation of duties, you need two parties. And a lot of times they're like, well, this is going to slow down, negatively impact. How do you deal with that perception and sort of twist it into a positive, not a negative?
I actually have some conflict on that answer right now, because leaving the public sector, law enforcement, investigations, I don't care about friction points. I want more friction points because it makes people more secure. It makes investigations easier if there's more pain points along the way. But now being in the private sector and understanding what it's like to sell a product or have a product, have clients who are looking to lessen their friction points. I conflict with that sometimes daily, but I think that, when it comes back to your question is, pain points are going to be there when it comes to being secure. It's just a natural aspect of it. Now, each company are going to have a different atmosphere of what they're explaining or exploring when it comes to these friction points. But I think it just, again, comes down to training. It comes down to making sure your employees and your clients are aware of the potential harm and risk and why you have these in place. Now, in my new role, we try to lessen those friction points and give our clients more visibility into their threat ecosystems and provide them some visibility on where attack surfaces are coming from. So I don't know if I answered your question fully, but it's something that I do conflict with now because, I said I'm seeing it in two different ways.
Yep. And just sort of with conflicts, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one because it's one that I just struggle with a lot, which is on ransomware, where I know originally, government and FBI basically came out and like, don't pay the ransom no matter what. But being more in the commercial sector, it was one of those where we had clients where if they paid the ransom of $2 million, they were up and running within 48 hours. And unfortunately, these ransomware companies are pretty reliable in terms of getting your data back. But if you don't pay the ransom, you have like Baltimore, where they were down for almost 9 months, negative impacts and everything else. But then I'm sort of to the point now where you should have enough security that you don't have to. But then I still get into that conflict where if you get in a situation where if you pay the ransom, it's cheaper and quicker and you're up and running. If you don't pay the ransom, you struggle. But is it really sending the right message? So I'm sort of one of those, depending on which day, I sort of teeter-totter. And I love your thoughts. Where are you at? And what advice do you give companies on sort of the ransomware, ransom payments versus not paying?
Yeah, well, I think you've seen over the last several years law enforcement back away from that stance
Exactly. Yeah.
and allow agents, or I'm sorry, corporations and clients to make that decision on their own. They have to understand where they are in their maturity, whether it's financially or in cybersecurity, where they are in the maturity wise, to make those decisions. We can't tell a company to make, or when I say we, I mean law enforcement, make a decision on pay a $5 million ransom if that's going to cripple their industry. Now, some businesses that they can absorb that, they have that built in, they have insurance to protect themselves from that. That may be a different business decision for them. We just ask them that, when it comes to these decisions, on the law enforcement spectrum, is that you are still securing that evidence and we're able to still provide, give us some information that we can help us maybe do some research onto that. But, I think, again, law enforcement was very strict maybe 10, 15 years ago about, hey, don't pay it. But now I think you have to change with the times. As you say, ransomware companies are honor amongst thieves.
Yeah, they're pretty reliable and scary.
Well, because it's a business requirement, right? If
business,
not,
if they don't give you the,
if they're not, then they lose their credibility and lose their ability to pay. So yeah, I think it comes down to individual companies, individual risk tolerance, what they are looking to absorb as an industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing you touch on is sort of that information sharing and that trust sort of between the government and commercial. And one thing that I am just so shocked that it got buried, because it is so concerning to me, is the expiration of the CISA Information Sharing Act of 2015, where it didn't get renewed. And now we're not only going in where we're still in a government shutdown. This is anyone listening, October 2025. And like CISA has 65% of their staff furloughed. But my bigger concern is commercial companies lost the protection. Like Congress did not renew the information sharing. So I'm even seeing now where I'm working on investigations and they're like, yeah, we're not going to call law enforcement because we're not protected. And I'm like, that is so dangerous because law enforcement's your friend. And I'm just wondering, as you sort of switched from government to commercial, are you seeing that expiration of the Information Sharing Act sort of causing a lot of concerns? And sort of what do you predict sort of for the future with that?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it right now because where I sit visibly for my company now, but I can just put on my old hat from July when I just retired in the service. Is I can see where dealing with clients or dealing with victims that corporate victims where there's concern, or they no longer having those protections, no longer being able to share that information, give and take. It's, corporations are sharing that information with the government's also giving them back protocols and frameworks on how to protect themselves. That's not happening either.
Right.
And we've been in this battle since the 90s, right? It goes all the way back to the Clinton administration with trying to put in protocols and frameworks to share information amongst law enforcement and corporations to protect, to strengthen our cybersecurity. And we still seem to be struggling with it today. And it's unfortunate. I commend Senator Peters for putting together a new bill, hopefully that'll go through. I think it's called the Protection of American Cyber Against Cyber Threats that he's looking to pass, that will retroactively replace CISA 2015 and give go back to October 1st and give those companies those protections that they require. But we need that, we need to have this information sharing. We can no longer operate in silos. Both in corporate America and in the government, we need each other. And one of the things that I did in my old role as the assistant director of the Secret Service was I went around to corporations and told them, we need you just as much as
Exactly.
you need us. You need
us.
Need
together, not separate.
Yeah, because, the government can only invest so much in cyber tools. There's only so many things that we can have. Corporations have sometimes bigger budgets, sometimes larger security operations centers. They're more concentrated on what their threat vectors look like, and they can provide us real intelligence. They can provide back to us and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is where we're seeing it from. This is the nation states that it's coming from. And it's a together battle that we need to fight. And without each other and without that information sharing and one of those pegs being weakened, it really lessens our defenses. So I hope Congress acts fast and either ups CISA 2015, which I don't think is going to happen, or implements Senator Peters' new bill, which I think encompasses most of CISA 2015 and gives those protections back to corporate America and allows the government to share that information back, so we can once again fight this as a whole.
No, and I agree. And this is one where time is of the essence, because we know precedence is key. And my concern is these commercial companies, that the more they now think they have to be independent, not share and hold information, the longer they do that, the less likely they are to then change back. So yeah, I'm really concerned, because to me, this is how we win. And right now, between the expiration, Congress letting 2015 expire, and the shutdown, I think we're giving like China, Russia early Christmas gifts. Because they're just sitting there fist pumping going, what is the U.S. doing? Because we're just making it, unfortunately, easier for the adversary. And I'm just curious, where do you see sort of the threat vectors? I know they talk a lot about Chinese, and to me, I sort of see them data theft. To me, sort of the Russians are big on sort of the monetary stuff, and you have a little bit of North Korea and Iran. Where do you see sort of the biggest threats for corporations or companies to really sort of focus on their protection?
Yeah, I think you hit all over the head. I think it's nation states, nation state sponsored. Domestically, I think you still have your domestic threats, and even when it comes to some of the cartels and Mexican gangs, they're heavily endorsed now into cyber fraud. They've transitioned their business model to go towards cyber and the financial benefits of cyber attacks. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It's your Iran, North Korea, China. They're all Russia, all the adversaries that we're not only seeing in government, but you're also seeing in private sector. When it comes to private sector, they're targeting critical infrastructure, they're targeting supply chain, and of course, intellectual property. That's all beneficial to them, and it's a big seller for them on the black market, and it's a big seller for them for the growth of their own countries and to weaken our national security.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit sort of about the user awareness piece. What are sort of other areas you're seeing, whether it's sort of from the increased attacks from cartels or nation state or either within the country, that they're going after, that like you think companies can do a better job in sort of protecting and securing their infrastructure and critical data?
Yeah, so I'll give a shameless plug to SecurityScorecard, my new company now, which is providing visible security along your supply chains and your critical infrastructure. It's that outside in looking. Companies are great at securing their perimeters. I think if you talk to any major CISO, you've been one for many companies. I think if you talk to any of your predecessors, they'll say we have all the tools in place to protect our perimeter. and we know where an attack's coming in. We know how to isolate it. We know how to segment it out, and we know how to, we know our vulnerabilities and we can identify them. But it's your it's your supply chain. Where are your vendors? Where's your vendors' weaknesses? Because today, who has your data? They might not be plugged into your system, but they might have access to critical data, or client data or sensitive information that can bring your company maybe not only cripple your operations, but also maybe bring reputational risk to your company. Losing secure information, even though it's a third party, could still hurt your industry and your client's reputation. So, giving that visibility, understanding where your clients' risks are, vulnerabilities are, and illuminating what we like to say is illuminating your ecosystem and finding out where your vulnerabilities come from. And it could be that third, fifth party vendor down the road that you don't even know, but they still could have a major impact on your daily use. And just giving visibility and having a knowledge of where your weakest link is probably where we see things going now when it comes to private sector corporations. Is I think if you look at stats over the last 2 years or so, supply chain has been like the most targeted. And I don't know, the number might be like 70% of your cyber attacks are on your supply chain. That just goes to show you our adversaries know that, hey, X major company, Fortune 500 company, they're pretty hard to get into, but they're selling their data or such and such access to their data. And I won't mention any major companies that this has happened to, but we're seeing it live every day, where these companies are being attacked. So, the advice that I have is knowing your supply chain and having some visibility on it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. One of my areas I focus is expert witness work, and we're seeing more and more on the liability and others where it's a third party vendor that had a vulnerability or an issue, an exposure that, what wasn't fixed or patched that allowed them to get into the company. So we're seeing that a lot. Well, one thing I'd love to get your thoughts on, because there's always sort of with vendors, and it goes back and forth, where it used to be, best of breed, right? It's better to go in and have like 8 or 9 different vendors that are all the best of breed, but then interoperability becomes a big issue. So then in the last 5 or 7 years, I think a lot of it was sort of single vendor, and you see all these acquisitions occurring between the big companies, and it's better to have one vendor with all products, but now it's sort of a code base. So now if there's an exposure, they can get into all the systems. So this is another one of, there's no right or wrong, and I struggle with it on a daily basis. I'm curious on your thoughts on where you are with the supply chain stuff. Is it better to have lots of vendors, best of breed, but then lots of interoperability problems, or single vendor, but then bigger exposure?
Again, I think it comes down to your company's maturity,
Yeah.
and your risk tolerance, right? That's a great question. I think no matter what, you're still exposed. Your vendors are still exposed. The bad guys know who we're all using. There's every company has to use certain products, right? And then there's those companies but like 15 companies out there that I think everybody has to use to be operational, and they have weaknesses. And the bad guys are looking at those vulnerabilities too. So it doesn't. We're interconnected in everything we do. We're interconnected with all operations. So I don't think it's a matter of one vendor or 10 vendors, because I think no matter what, you still have 10,000 vendors. You still have to have some kind of visibility in there, and maybe also just going back to those point in time questionnaires and those point in time questions of your controls in place, and doing that maybe once a year or once a quarter. Maybe that's not the answer anymore. Maybe there needs to be some type of continuous monitoring of your vendors, of your critical infrastructure, to give you some real time knowledge of where those pain points and potential vulnerabilities lie.
And I'm with you. It's the old sort of prevention is ideal, detection is a must. And that's why I put them out a lot of clients is monitoring and tracking, where you can't stop everything, but you try to detect it in a timely manner to minimize the impact. The other thing you mentioned, which I'd love to get your thoughts on, is you said sort of risk tolerance. And I know I still work with clients today, which blows me away, where we're closing a deal we're getting ready to sign and ink, whether it's an assessment or other services. And one of the execs will look at me and go, okay, Eric, we just want to put in a liability clause that will be 100% secure. And if we get compromised, you'll be liable. And it's like, game over, right? I'm out. And they're like, what do you mean? Don't you back your own product? And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's going to happen. So from both the government and then switching over, how do you see sort of selling execs on that risk tolerance? Because I know it's hard saying, okay, we're going to accept 30% loss or we're going to allow attacks. So like the embrace the breach is a hard concept for the execs to swallow, but it's necessary. How do you sort of sell or convince them that there has to be a risk tolerance and accept some level of risk or exposure?
That's why CISO's jobs are like 18 months, right? 24 months usually on average. That's what's a
I
life
joke, you're like
cycle.
NFL coaches. You get fired a lot, but somebody will always hire you, right? So
um, yeah, I think education on the board, right? That's pretty much important. As a CISO, I don't envy their role because
yeah.
it's hard to explain the technical terms into some of the boards that may not be so technically savvy anymore. I think we're starting to see more boards become more technically savvy. I think it's going to be a must in the coming years, where boards understand not just technical language, but the technical landscape of what's out there and your threat vectors. But I think it comes down to educating your board, understanding as, hey, yeah, we've invested X amount of millions into security. That doesn't make us 100% secure. It just limits our risks and our vulnerabilities. And again, to the point where we are breached, we have mechanisms in place to segment that out or block it from getting to our critical infrastructure. Or we have our critical data segmented away from being exposed to potential breach. So I just think it comes down to that education and educating your board on we're never going to be 100% secure no matter what. We can invest billions. JP Morgan invests billions into their cyber protections, and they still have a risk tolerance, right? They still know that they're going to be attacked and breached, and it's just a matter of segmenting that away. So I think I got away from your question a little bit, but I think it just comes down to understanding, making sure you understand what your board's risk tolerance is as a CISO or as a tech leader, understanding what their expectations are, but also explaining back to them what those vulnerabilities are and how you've augmented some of those risks.
And I agree with you. It's all about prioritization, and to me, much better communication. I sort of always say all problems are created and solved with better communication. But yeah, I see a lot with these boards where they want Bugatti level security, but they want to pay the price of a Honda, right? And I'm like, you're not going to get a Bugatti for 50K, right? It's just not going to happen. So it's a lot of that communication piece. One thing I do always like leaving a little time is, you sort of mentioned it briefly, but sort of what is this concept sort of the scorecard you mentioned, and like, how does it provide better visibility to the companies and sort of benefit?
So CecurityScorecard started about 13 years ago. Our two founders were both CISOs in major corporations in New York City, and they saw that their vulnerability was their supply chain, and they wanted to come up with a credit card. I'm sorry, not a credit score, like your own personal credit score type rating. And they had this plan to put in place, and it's an A through F rating system, where they first started off with just ratings, where they looked at your own vulnerabilities, they looked at your own systems and said, here are your vulnerabilities. You're ranked A or an F, and if you're an F, you're like 14% more likely to be breached than somebody who's an A. And there goes your numbers. You might be an A, but you're still going to get breached, right?
Yeah.
And recently, over the last couple of years or months, they've expanded to supply chain detection and response, where now we look out at your vendors and we look out at your supply chain and say, hey, X company, you're doing business with 5,000 companies. You don't even realize it. Your third party, your fourth party, your fifth party vendors. What are your top priorities? Who holds your most critical data? We want to look at those vendors and be able to provide you back a daily rating, daily scorecard on those vendors, and that scorecard will tell you their vulnerabilities. If you see them drop from an A to a B, you might want to reach out to them and find out. And we also have a managed service too, where it's called Max, where we actually will go work with those vendors and say, hey, we notice that you have a dip. We notice you have some vulnerabilities, and this is how you need to fix it. You need to fix it in a certain amount of period of time. So what it really does, it just gives you what we like to say, illumination of your whole supply chain. Security Scorecard gives you that ability, and it gives you ability also to basically, we can augment your third-party risk management teams. As we know, companies don't invest a lot in their third-party risk management, or they're just not scaled enough to handle some of the major vendors and major companies now that are coming on board and be able to handle all their daily responsibilities. So we're able to augment that through our Max platform and provide visibility into your third and fourth, fifth vendors, and provide that score, score a rating to what those possible vendors risk could be. So it's again providing that visibility into your supply chain and your critical infrastructure, and we're able to do that for the government too. We're able to go into
nice.
State of Florida as a client, where we can look at their critical infrastructure and tell them some of their vulnerabilities are, and provide them that daily update. And that's one thing; it's continuously monitoring.
Nice. So it's not a one and done, because that's always the problem with patching. Yeah, you got to keep monitoring it. Yeah.
We scrape the internet every day and a half, and be able to provide real-time data. We're not just a SaaS company; we're also a data collection company. So we're able to provide real threat intelligence back, and our platform is supported by the threat intelligence that we're able to collect on a daily basis, and then give our clients that visibility daily of what their threat vectors are.
Great. And how can they find you or find the company online?
Yeah, SecurityScorecard.com. You can go right to our website. If you own a company or a CISO of a company, you can do a free scorecard on your company right now. You can go in and for free and type in your URL and find out some of your scores, and then we'd be happy to provide through the website. You can click on it and have a vendor come out and talk to you and talk about some of our products, and provide some visibility into your threats. Why I like the company so much is that it's very much aligned with my old career. I said, when I used to protect presidents and vice presidents and provide the security for them. Now it's just a different stakeholder. Now it's just businesses and clients and critical infrastructure, and it's still national security. So it's a great mission, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I was going to say, instead of presidents and vice presidents, it's CEOs and COOs, right? But still important to protect. Yeah.
Or critical infrastructure and American citizens.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. As we wrap up, one thing I always like to ask is, do you sort of have like a favorite quote or principle that sort of you live by? Like with me, the two that I always use is, let data drive decisions, not emotions. Like, focus on the data, not an emotional response in cyber. And then the other one is, smart people know the right answers. Brilliant people ask the right questions. So I'm curious, as we sort of wrap up, do you sort of have a final advice, final quote, or final information you want to leave the listener?
Yeah, you're probably not going to like this one. I do hear you say that other quote a lot, which is very good. Don't trust anyone. That used to be my motto when we for my old mission. We trust but verify, because we're providing a secure environment for our protectee, for the President of the United States, and we had to have that tolerance of hey, prove who you are and prove this environment's clean. Well, guess that actually kind of rolls over now into my new career. Is we're providing that prove that trust and prove where we can allow things into our environment or not allow things into our environment. So that's the one I'll leave you with.
Yeah. No, and we align. I'm actually looking. I don't think I have it here, but I worked at the CIA. And when I left, they gave me a coffee mug, and on the coffee mug it says, "Trust no one, admit nothing, deny everything." Right. So I'm definitely with you on that trust factor. But Mike, it's truly been a pleasure. Thanks for having and being on the show, and hope to have you back sometime in the future.
Dr. Cole, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to Life of a CISO. Once again, listen to this a few times. I mean, Mike drops so many good nuggets of information that you can start implementing today, because that's really the goal, is to give you practical advice that can start changing your career and changing your business today, not in the future. So make sure you dial into the next episode of Life of a CISO.